Welcome to the Keys to the Past, and thank you for joining this quiet journey through the mist of history. Tonight, we'll wander, slowly, without hurry, deep into the ancient lands of Persia, a world long, long ago, a world of sun-warmed plains that stretch beyond sight, of winds that whisper through cypress trees, of kings who moved as deliberately as the constellations turning above them. You are safe here, as safe as a jewel in the vaults of it, as sheltered as a caravan resting in the shadow of the royal road. So let your body sink into your bed. Notice how your breath begins to slow, to match the rhythm of my voice, as we trace the threads of an empire that once wove order from chaos. This is the story of the Achaemenid Empire that rose like dawn over the Zagros Mountains, where the footsteps of merchants, warriors, and dreamers still echo softly in the dust. Together, we'll walk its forgotten paths, stand in markets fragrant with saffron and myrrh, gaze upon palaces where the very walls seem to breathe. Tonight's journey is called the Empire That Never Slept, and you will drift through 4 gates of time, each one carrying you deeper into rest. The rustle of silk banners, the hush of a scribe's pen at midnight, the distant laughter of children in courtyards now buried by centuries, and finally, the gentle closing of history's own eyes. So let yourself relax, as completely as a river surrenders to the sea. You are here, you are held, and tonight you need only listen, as the past sings you to sleep. Before the empire there was only the landage and patient, breathing in the slow rhythm of centuries. The sun rose each morning over rolling plains of golden grass, their tips catching fire with the first light. Rivers, silver and serpentine, curled through valleys where willows bent to kiss their own reflections. In the north, mountains stood like sleeping giants, their peaks dusted with eternal snow. To the south, the sea murmured against the shore, a lullaby without end. And the people, oh the people, there were many, and there were few. Scattered villages clung to the earth like dewdrops on a spider's web, small, fragile, yet shimmering with quiet life. Farmers turned the soil with hands as rough as bark. Shepherds led their flocks over hills that had known no other footsteps. Fishermen cast their nets into waters that had never known hunger. There was no empire, no throne, no crown, only the slow turning of seasons, the sigh of the wind through the barley, the distant laughter of children chasing fireflies at dusk. But beneath this peace, something stirred. The tensions unseen. The land was not one, but many, tribes and clans, each with their own gods, their own stories, their own ways of marking time. Some worshipped the sun, painting their faces in its gold. Others whispered prayers to the moon, leaving offerings of milk and honey in hollowed stones. Trade routes crisscrossed the land like veins, carrying salt, iron, and whispered grievances. A dispute over a watering hole here, a stolen bride there. A feud between brothers that became a feud between villages, then between valleys. No war yet, no great clash of armies, but the air sometimes grew heavy, as if the sky itself held its breath, and in the heart of it all, a child was born. The first hint of what would come, in a village no different from any other, beneath a roof of thatch and smoke, a woman sang to her newborn son. The firelight painted his face in flickering gold, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw something in his eyes, not the soft, unfocused gaze of an infant, but something older, something knowing. She shivered, though the night was warm. The wind outside sighed through the trees, carrying with it a whisper not of fear, but of anticipation. Far away, a wolf howled, and the empire, though it did not yet exist, took its first breath. The child's name was lost to Timur. Perhaps it was never spoken aloud. 4 names have power, and even then, the elders sensed something restless in him. He grew as all children do, knees scraped from running, hands calloused from chores, voice cracking with the weight of adolescence. But his eyes were always elsewhere. While other boys wrestled in the dust or chased goats through the hills, he stood at the edge of the village, staring at the horizon where the sky met the earth. The wind tugged at his hair, whispering secrets only he could hear. "There is more," it seemed to say, "more than this." And he listened. The first hunger at 12, he saw his first war party. Not a battle, not yet. Just a band of riders from the northern clans, their cloaks stitched with wolf teeth, their spears tipped in cold iron. They did not stop at the village. They did not even glance at the farmers trembling in their fields. But he watched them. He watched the way their horses moved like a single creature, muscles rippling under sweat-slick hides. He watched the way their leader carried himself chin high, shoulders back, as if the earth itself bowed beneath his footsteps. That night he did not sleep. Instead, he sharpened a stick against a stone, over and over, until his fingers bled. The whisper in the dark by 15. He spoke less and listened more. The village elders muttered about raids in the west. A drought had parched the southern plains, driving herds northward. A chieftain's daughter had been stolen, and blood would answer blood. "We are small," the elders sighed. "We survive." But the boyno, the young man, now did not want to survive. He wanted to devour. One evening, an old wanderer stumbled into the village, his feet cracked from road dust, his beard tangled with burrs. The villagers fed him stew and let him sleep by the fire. But when the young man approached, the wanderer's milky eyes sharpened. "You," he rasped. "You hear it too, don't you?" The young man said nothing. The wanderer grinned, teeth yellow as old bone. "The wind isn't just wind. The stars aren't just stars. They're waiting for you." Then he coughed, spat into the fire, and said no more. By morning, he was gone. The first blood at 17, he killed a man. It was not a duel, not a glorious clash of steel. Just a thief in the night, a knife in the dark, a gurgling gasp as the young man drove his blade home. The thief had come for the village's grain. The young man had come for something else. As the life fled the thief's eyes, the young man felt no horror, no guilt, only a warmth spreading through his chest, like the first sip of wine after a winter's fast. Power, he wiped his knife clean on the dead man's shirt and walked away, leaving the body for the crows. The gathering storm by 20. The village feared him, not openly, no. They still smiled when he passed, still offered him bread and mead, but their laughter died when he entered the room. Their children hid behind their mothers' skirts. He no longer cared. The wanderers who passed through brought news. A chieftain in the east had united 3 tribes under his banner. A fortress of black stone rose in the west, its walls slick with blood. The world was stirring, and the wind carried the scent of smoke. One night, under a moon swollen and red, the young man packed a satchel with dried meat, a waterskin, and the knife that had tasted blood. He did not say goodbye. He simply walked into the dark, toward the distant flicker of campfires on the horizon, toward war, toward destiny. The campfires burned low that night, their embers pulsing like the eyes of wolves in the dark. He stood at the edge of the warband's circle, a shadow among shadows. They were not yet his men, not yet, but they would be. Their leader, a grizzled veteran with a scar splitting his lip, spat into the fire and laughed. "Another stray," he sneered. "You'll die before the first arrow flies." The young man said nothing. He simply reached into his satchel and tossed the severed head of the eastern scout onto the flames. Silence. Then, not mocking, but hungry, approving, the scarred leader grinned. "Well then, welcome." And so it began. Blood and oaths war was not what the songs would later claim. It was not noble, not glorious. It was mud and thirst and the stench of rotting teeth in close quarters. It was waking to frost on your blanket and the sound of men sobbing in the dark. But the young man, no, the warrior now, he fought like a creature half-starved, his knife flashing in the dawn light, his footsteps silent as a hunting cat's. The others whispered. They called him Ghost. They called him Reaper. And when the scarred leader fell an arrow through the throat, his last words, a wet chucklet, was the young man who caught the banner before it touched the earth. Who leads now? A voice shouted. The wind answered before he could. The first victory, the fortress should not have fallen. It was high, its walls slick with rain, its gates barred with iron. The warlord who ruled it had never known defeat. But the young man knew something his enemies did not. Walls do not matter when men are afraid. He sent whispers ahead of him, stories, lies, tales of a demon who walked in human skin, who drank the screams of his enemies like wine. By the time his warband reached the gates, the guards' hands shook on their spears. And when he struck not at dawn, not at dusk, but in the hush of deepest night, the fortress fell like rotten fruit. The warlord begged. The young man did not. When the sun rose, a new banner flew above the black stone, a single eye, stitched in gold thread, watching, always watching. The first loyalty. Men came, not just warriors, but farmers, smiths, herders with nothing left to lose. They knelt, not to a king, but to the promise of one. A woman with iron-grey hair and fingers stained with dye pressed a scrap of cloth into his hand. "My son died for you," she said. "Make it worth the price." He looked at the cloth, a child's drawing, stick figures holding spears, a son with a smiling face. For the first time in years, his chest ached. That night, he gave his first order as a leader. No more burning villages, no more slaughtering flocks. We take the land, warlord, not at all. And so the empire, though it did not yet have a name, began to grow. The first crown, it was not gold, not jewels, just a circlet of braided grass woven by a child from a conquered village. For the king, the girl whispered, her knees trembling in the dirt. He knelt, let her place it on his head. The men held their breath. And when he stood, the wind carried a new sound across the land, cheering. The empire had a pulse now. It thrummed in the looms of the silk weavers, their fingers dancing over threads of crimson and gold. It hummed in the forges, where hammers fell like heartbeat rhythms on glowing steel. It whispered in the canals, where gondolas drifted under bridges carved with the faces of forgotten gods. And at the center of it, Aldo Palace, not a fortress of fear, but a sprawl of sun-warmed marble and jasmine vines, its courtyards alive with the laughter of scribes debating philosophy, and the clink of teacups as generals played chess with pebbles for pieces. This was no longer a conqueror's camp. This was a civilization. Dawn in a marketplace, the spice merchant's stalls smelled of memories, cinnamon from the southern jungles, where trees wept amber when cut, pepper so sharp it made the eyes water, hauled over mountains by silent men with scarred feet, saffron threads like stolen sunlight, laid reverently on velvet. A child barefoot, grinning, darted through the crowd, clutching a stolen fig. The merchant shouted, then sighed, then tossed another fig after her. "For your mother," he called. "Tell her she still owes me for the cumin." Nearby, a storyteller spun tales of the empire's birth. His audience leaned in, breathless, as he spoke of the young man who walked out of the dark with a knife and a dream. None noticed the figure in the shadowed alcove, hooded, motionless, listening. The quiet places, not all corridors, echoed with footsteps. Deep in the palace, there was a room where the light fell in slanting gold bars, and the only sound was the turning of pages. Here, the empire's archivista woman, so old her bones seemed made of parchment, painted history onto scrolls. "Why'd you record the defeats as carefully as the victories?" a young scribe once asked. She dipped her brush in ink, the color of dried blood. "Because a tree that only grows upward will snap in the first storm." Outside, a gardener tended the roses, his hands gentle on the thorns. The language of power, the council chamber, was a study in silence. Ministers stood at the map table, their fingers tracing borders, trade routes, rebellions, nipped like buds before they could bloom. They spoke in numbers, in grain yields, in the movement of troops disguised as merchant caravans. At the head of the table, the emperor, no longer a young man, but not yet old, a single fig between his fingers. The northern ambassadors asked the spymaster. "Let them wait," said the emperor. "Let them wonder." A servant poured wine. No one noticed when the emperor slipped the fig into his sleeve. For later, for a barefoot girl who might be waiting. Twilight rituals as the sun bled into the horizon. The city exhaled. Bakers pulled loaves from clay ovens, their crusts crackling like distant applause. Lovers met under bridges, their promises swallowed by the river's murmur. In the temple district, a priestess lit 100 candles, each flame a tiny rebellion against the dark. And in a room with no windows, the spymaster pinned a scrap of parchment to the wall. Whispers from the east, a warlord's daughter, a knife with a blade of black glass. The candle guttered. Somewhere a dog barked. The empire turned in its sleep. The weight of a crown, midnight in the palace. The emperor stood at his balcony, fingers resting on the railing like a falconer, waiting for his bird to return. Below, the city slept or pretended to. A rustle behind him. A whisper of silk. "You should rest, my lord." The only person who entered without knocking. "I dreamt of the village," he said. "The one where I killed the thief." A pause. Then, carefully, "Do you regret it?" The emperor watched a lone lantern bobbing through the streets like a lost firefly. "I regret that I felt nothing." The spymaster's silence was heavier than the crown. The poison in the garden. They found the first traitor in the rose courtyard. A minor official face down in the fountain, his mouth full of petals. The water had turned faintly pink. "Not poison," murmured the physician. "Drowning." He was held down. The gardener wept as he clipped the blood-stained roses. They were just starting to bloom. He kept saying, "Just starting." That afternoon, the emperor received a letter sealed with black wax. "Your father begged to..." The parchment crumbled to ash in his fist. The spymaster's dance. The underground war was fought with smiles and sugared almonds. A merchant's daughter married a southern prince and opened his letters before he did. A celebrated poet penned odes to liberty, in code for certain ears. Even the palace cats grew fat on kitchen scraps given in exchange for which doors they'd seen ajar at odd hours. But the spymaster's favorite weapon was simpler. "Tell me," she'd say, pouring tea the color of forgiveness, "what hurts?" And they always did. The knife without a handle. The warlord's daughter arrived during the monsoon. She came barefoot through the palace gates, rain streaming off her like liquid armor, the knife at her belt black glass. Hungry-edged was the only dry thing about her. "I could kill you now," she said, staring at the throne. The emperor leaned forward. "Why don't you?" she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Because someone else wants you dead more." That night, 3 council members disappeared. Their bodies turned up weeks later in a fishing net, mouths sewn shut with gold thread. The emperor's secret only the archivist knew. In the deepest vault, behind a tapestry of the first battle, there was a box. Inside the box, a child's drawing, stick figures, a smiling sun. Sometimes, very late, the emperor would sit there in the dark, not weeping, not praying, just breathing in the silence before the storm. The storm gathers, the messenger's horse collapsed at the gates, its lungs heaving bloody foam. The eastern passes have fallen. The man gasped, his fingers leaving rust-colored smears on the marble. They're burning the temples. The river runs with ashes. The council chamber erupted, generals shouting, ministers clutching maps like talismans. Only the emperor remained still, his eyes on the spot. She nodded once. The game was over. Now came the fire. The first battle. Dusk at Crimson Fields, they met the enemy where the plains turned red at sunset. The emperor rode without armor, his standard a ragged strip of cloth tied to a spear. That same childish drawing of stick figures and a sun, now stained with road dust. Why that banner? The warlord's daughter asked, testing the edge of her black glass knife. He smiled, to remind me what we're fighting for. When the arrows blackened the sky, she was the one who raised her voice in the old northern war chant. By midnight, the field belonged to the Empire. By dawn, the crows belonged to the dead. The siege of Marble Teeth. The fortress had never been taken. Its walls jutted from the cliffs like broken molars, its gates sealed with molten lead. The defenders laughed as they hurled down stones and boiling oil. For 11 days, the Empire's army starved. On the 12th, the gardener, the one who'd wept for his roses, showed the Emperor a crack in the cliffs. For the roots, he whispered, so they may drink. That night, 300 men crawled through the earth like worms. When they emerged inside the walls, they found the wells already poisoned. The Emperor drank last. The warlord's gift victory came at a price. The warlord's daughter fell holding the bridge at Silver Fork, her black glass knife shattering in a dying man's ribs. They brought her body back, wrapped in her own banner. The Emperor knelt beside her for a full day and night. When he rose, his hands were full of seeds, tiny, dark, plucked from her hair. Plant these, he told the gardener, where the roses grow. The next spring, strange vines bloomed there, their flowers the color of a bruise. They smelled like iron, like memory. The crowning mercy, the enemy general was old, older than the Empire, older than the stories. He knelt in the dust with his broken sword across his palms, his breath whistling through a wound in his chest. Make it quick, he wrote. The Emperor looked at the burning city beyond the walls, at the refugees huddled like sheep in the ditches. Then he took the general's sword and snapped it over his knee. Go home, he said. Tell them what you saw. The general's tears made clean tracks through the blood on his face. That moment, more than any battle, broke the war. The vines bloomed black that summer. They curled around the palace columns like sleeping serpents, their velvet petals drinking the sunlight. The gardener, older now, his hands knotted with years, still tended them with the same devotion he'd once given his roses. Do they have a name? Asked a child from the kitchens, daring to touch one dark blossom. The gardener smiled. The soldiers call them widow's kiss. The poets call them midnight's whisper. He clipped a single flower and tucked it behind the child's ear, but she would have called them stubborn weeds. Some said the vines grew fastest near the anniversaries of battles. Others claimed they leaned toward the sound of marching songs. The Emperor never spoke of them at all. The symphony of small things peace tasted like. Apricots candied in honey, sold by street vendors who sang the prices instead of shouting, ink drying on the first page of the Compendium of Waters, where cartographers mapped every river, stream, and forgotten creek in the Empire. The sigh of silk as the danced with her wife in their moonlit courtyard, both pretending not to hear the young agents whispering secrets through the garden gate, and once, remarkably, like snow, a thing so rare in the capital that scholars rushed to record its texture. Philosophers debated its meaning, and children licked it from their palms like powdered sugar before it vanished. The Emperor watched it melt from his balcony, his breath making ghosts in the air. Next time, he told no one, we'll build sleds. The library at dusk. The archivist's successor was a half-blind scholar who saw further than most. Under his care, the library swallowed whole kingdoms' worth of stories, epics from conquered lands, recipes for extinct wines, even the enemy general's memoir. One shelf held nothing but love letters intercepted during the war, now preserved as fragile artifacts of ordinary hearts. The Emperor visited often, always at twilight, always alone. Why keep the losing side's histories? A young scribe once asked. The scholar turned a page so gently it might have been a butterfly's wing. Because the truth isn't a single thread. It's the whole tapestry of it, the tangled bits underneath. Outside, the first fireflies of evening blinked like tiny, wandering stars. The weightless crown. For the first time in living memory, the council debated something other than war. The new aqueducts will require, but the dye makers' guild insists, if we plant the southern slopes with lavender. The bees. The emperor listened, chin propped on one hand, tracing the grain of the table with a fingertip. The crown lay beside his elbow, discarded like an outgrown toy. Later, walking the palace walls, he found the kitchen girl now, a woman with a child of her own, teaching her daughter to flip fig slices in a pan. "Will you be a chef?" he asked the girl. She shook her head. "Solemn. I'm going to invent a new color." The emperor laughed so loudly the guards startled. That night, he sent a trunk of rare pigments to her doorstep, a silent feast. The anniversary of the last battle was never commemorated, but every year on that date, a single place setting appeared in the palace kitchens. A chipped clay bowl, a wooden spoon worn smooth with use, a cup of the cheap barley beer once rationed to soldiers. No one knew who set it up. No one cleared it away until dawn. The gardener found it adorn a single black petal, crisp and curled at the edges, lying like a dead moth on the soil. He knelt, fingers trembling as he turned it over. The vine it had fallen from stood bare, its branches suddenly skeletal against the palace walls. Behind him, the emperor stood in shadow. "Pull them up," he said. "My lord, they're dead." The emperor's voice was softer than the gardener had ever heard it. "Let them be dead." But when the old man returned at dusk with his shears, he found the emperor gone, and every fallen petal carefully gathered into a silk pouch. The silent council, the maps changed. Where once there had been neat borders inked in gold, now smudges of crimson crept along the edge of our village, gone quiet here. A tax collector vanished there. The ministers spoke in careful circles. Minor unrest in the western hills, merely delayed shipments. Not outright refusal, of course. The emperor's mercy is well known, but perhaps a firmer hand. The slid a single scrap of paper across the table. "They call you the paper emperor. They say your peace has made you slow." The emperor folded the note into a crane and set it aflame with a candle. "Let them talk," he said. But that night, he walked the armory for the first time in a decade. The weight of feathers. The library burned in the dry season. Not the whole of it, just the east wing. Just the histories. Just the shelf with the love letters. The scholar pulled 7 scrolls from the flames. Before the smoke took his voice forever. "An accident," declared the captain of the guard. "A warning," whispered the kitchen girl. Now a woman with paint-stained hands. The emperor stood in the ashes, a half-charred letter clinging to his boot. He bent to pick it up, and the paper crumbled like old bone. That afternoon, the archivist's successor packed his remaining books and left for the mountains. He took the war memoirs with him. The last gift, the warlord's granddaughter, arrived without She had her ancestors' black glass knife, her father's talent for silence, and none of their patience. When the emperor received her in the garden, she did not kneel. "You spared my grandfather," she said. "Why?" The emperor watched a ladybug traverse his knuckles. "Because mercy is the one weapon no enemy expects." She laughed a sharp, bright sound, and look how well that worked. From her sleeve, she produced a single seed pod from the dead vines. They only bloom where blood was spilled. "My mother told me." She pressed it into his palm and left. That night, the emperor buried it in the armory courtyard. The emperor's hands, he was not young anymore. The mirror showed a man with silver threading his hair, with lines carved deep by smiles and suns and sleepless nights. His hands, once quick with a knife, now bore the ink stains of peacetime, the calluses of scrolls rather than swords. When the first arrow struck the palace gates, he did not reach for his armor. He reached for a child's drawing. The siege of silent bells, they came at harvest time, when the granaries were full and the rivers ran low. The rebels know, the emperor corrected himself. The people did not bother with war horns or pot. They simply arrived one morning, a tide of dusty faces and hungry eyes, surrounding a city that had forgotten walls. The palace cooks baked bread until their hands blistered. The librarians packed away scrolls in oilcloth. The old spy master kissed her wife and strapped on a dagger with hands that did not shake. Only the emperor remained still at his balcony, watching as the first stones struck the gates. "You could flee," murmured the gardener. Now bent like a willow, the emperor touched the child's drawing in his sleeve. "Where would I go?" "The armory's secret, in the courtyard where he'd buried the seed." A sapling now stood in the high, its leaves the color of dried blood. The emperor knelt before it, as armored footsteps echoed through the corridors. "Will it bloom?" asked the kitchen girl-turned-artist, crouching beside him. Her hands were stained, not with paint now, but with the soot of putting out fires. He pressed a palm to the earth. "Not in my lifetime." She pulled a tiny vial from her pocket indigo. Her first invented coloron, poured it at the sapling's roots. "Then we'll plant something else." Somewhere above them, a door splintered. The last council they gathered in the map room one final time. Her dagger unsheathed on the table like a punctuation mark. The one-eyed scholar, clutching the surviving histories to his chest. The captain of the guard, who had never seen battle until today. The gardener, holding a single withered rose. The emperor unrolled a scroll, not a map, but a poem by the warlord's daughter, found among her effects after "All empires are sandcastles," he read aloud. "But oh, what lovely sand." When the torches appeared in the courtyard below, they poured the last of the wine and waited. The final moment they found him in the garden. Of course, not on the throne, not in armor, just an old man sitting beneath a sapling, a child's drawing in one hand, a fig in the other. The warlord's granddaughter stepped forward, her black glass knife gleaming. "Do you have any last words?" The emperor studied her face, the tilt of her brows. The stubborn set of her Jahan smiled. "You look like her." Then he closed his eyes. And the empire, and the story, and the night, the seed when the fires cooled and the looters grew bored. A single survivor crept back to the armory courtyard. The kitchen artist, her indigo-stained fingers digging in the ashes. The sapling was gone, but there, in the soot, she found one hard black seed still warm, still whole. She slipped it into her mouth and held it under her tongue as she walked away. The fig trees came first. They pushed through cracked marble, their roots cradling shattered statues like mothers holding broken toys. Vines curtained the empty palace windows. Pigeons nested in the hollow crowns of forgotten kings. The child granddaughter of the kitchen artist traced her fingers over a wall where frescoes once blazed. Now only fragments remained. A hand here, the curve of a lute there, the edge of a smile swallowed by moss. "Who lived here?" she asked. The old woman spat indigo-stained saliva into the dirt. People who thought they'd last forever. Above them, a lone nightingale sang the same 5 notes over and over, as if trying to remember the rest. The archivist's last joke. The scholar's surviving books turned up in strange places. A treatise on irrigation propping up a farmer's broken cart. Love letters lining a nest of city-dwelling foxes. The enemy general's memoir repurposed as kindling in a rebel-esque granddaughter-s. But the best joke was the one nobody found: the single scroll, sealed in a copper tube and slipped into the empire's deepest well. It read, "You are standing in the belly of a ghost. Be kind, it's still digesting." The gardener's revenge. No one knew who kept tending the palace grounds. Yet every spring, a few more black vines erupted from the rubble. Their flowers bloomed only where shadows fell at a certain angle, only when the wind came from the east. A traveling poet once picked one and died, screaming. After that, the villagers left them alone. The spy master's epilogue: she opened a tea house by the sea. Old customers knew to ask for the special blend, a bitter infusion that made you whisper secrets without meaning to. Her wife rolled her eyes but kept the books in a cipher only they understood. One rainy season, a familiar figure appeared at the door of the warlord's granddaughter. Now, grey at the temples, her black glass knife sheathed in silk. They played chess until dawn. Neither mentioned the empty third chair between them. The seed's journey. The kitchen artist's granddaughter grew old. The seed lived under her tongue for 60 years. Through marriages, wars, the birth of her own Sharpie daughter. On her deathbed, she coughed it into that daughter's palm, hard and dark as the day it was found. Plant it when the empire is forgotten, she whispered. Her daughter waited until the next eclipse. The sapling came up, and you, listener, breathing in the dark, you who have walked these ruins with me. Would you remember? The story loops eternally. Press play again tomorrow night. Welcome to the Keys to the Past, and thank you for joining this quiet journey through the mist of... And now, let's just rest for a moment. Let the sound of the night wrap around you like a soft blanket. Breathe in and out, slowly, deeply. Let all the thoughts of the day drift away like mist upon the water. Thank you for sharing this moment with me tonight. Thank you for listening. As the stars shimmer above and the world grows quiet, allow this soft, slow music to carry you further, deeper into comfort, deeper into rest. Good night, dear listener. May peace find you tonight.